want you to imagine I invite you to study the Grand Canyon. I hand you a photo and you begin to look at the colors. You begin to look at the waves of the sedimentary rock, and you can't help but notice how tall the Grand Canyon is. Now imagine, if you will, I take you to the edge of the Grand Canyon. You are struck by the breathtaking views. You feel the wind beating against your body. You're no longer asking questions about analysis or what you can learn. You're now wrestling in a very real sense with God's creation. For many of us, that first illustration explains our experience with how we read the Bible. We look at the pages and we ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? What am I supposed to be analyzing? When you read the scriptures from a gospel centered perspective, I think you don't stop at asking questions of analysis, but you go further and wrestle with the question, what type of God is this? We're starting a series entitled Sing the Gospel in Every Book of the Bible, where I want to equip you to have a more healthy gospel centered look as you approach the scriptures. Now, many of you maybe have read books with a similar topic. You've been a part of cohorts that talked about similar things. But I want to give you 3 reasons why our series is going to be a little different. Number 1, it'll be concise. We'll have a short video on each of the 66 books of the Bible that help you see the gospel there in it. Number 2, it's not just for teachers of the Bible, it's also for readers of the Bible. So if you're not a pastor, you're not a church planter, you're not a small group leader, this will still have a benefit for you. But it's not just for readers of the Bible, it's also for teachers of the Bible. So whether you're at seminary or you're leading Sunday school, this will equip you to be more gospel centered in your approach. Number 3, many people look at the scripture and have a healthy understanding of the gospel principle, but they have a weakness as it relates to the gospel story. Alternatively, others have a healthy handle on the gospel story, but the gospel principle is an area of weakness for them. Let me help unpack that a little bit. The gospel principle is this idea that you are saved by grace alone, but it is not a grace that stays alone. If you can imagine a mountain, and at the top of that mountain is a grace that saves alone, but it is not a grace that stays alone. On one bottom side of that mountain is what we call legalism. It's this idea that it's what I do, it's my works, it's my performance that makes me saved. Well, no, that's not the gospel principle. On the other side of that mountain at the bottom is what we call antinomianism. It's this idea that God's love has positioned me, that it does not matter what I do for the rest of my life, I am saved. And the gospel principle is that you are saved by a grace that saves alone, but it is never a grace that stays alone. Now, the gospel story, please hear me, is creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. What does that mean? In the beginning, God created everything, and He created everything good. Immediately after that, not too long after that, man decided to turn away from God's ways. Sin and death entered the world. We call that the fall. But God, in His grace, He saw fit to send His Son Jesus to save us. That is where redemption comes in. Jesus is saving not just our life, but He's saving systems. He's saving sexuality. He's saving the family. All things that God created good, Jesus came to redeem. And we'll finally see it in the restoration that God will have a new heaven and a new earth. And all things that were once fallen have now been restored to their original design. Creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. So we have the gospel principle and we have the gospel story. And when you hold those two things together in tension, what do they point us to? They point us to the gospel person, Jesus. I want to give you an example. If you think of the story of David and Goliath, many of us have heard a very moralistic perspective of this story. That Goliath comes and David prays hard enough. He believes hard enough. He trusts God hard enough that he defeats Goliath. And what we live from that story is the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And I want to let you know that that sounds good, but that is a moralistic perspective of that story. Now, if you ask a different question as you approach that scripture, you ask, who does this story point us to? because I think I see the gospel principle there. I think I see a gospel story there. David fights Goliath as a representative champion, which means if he wins against the enemy, his victory is given to Israel. If David defeats Goliath as their representative champion, David's victory is given to Israel, even though David fought the battle. What can we lift from that? David points us to Jesus, who fought the giant of death and sin. But watch this, Jesus didn't just defeat death and sin, he gave his life to defeat the giants of death and sin. And his burial and 3 days later, his resurrection have shown us that he's defeated the greatest giants we would ever come up against. If Jesus could defeat the giants of death and sin, then I can confidently face whatever other giant comes my way. When you hold the gospel principle and you hold the gospel story together in tension as you look at the text, it points us to the gospel person, Jesus. It's my hope that we can spend time together in this series, not just wondering what can we analyze from the text to give us some good rules to live by, but it's my hope that we can begin to look at the scriptures and have an experience as we see the announcement of the good news of the gospel. I'll see you soon as we continue this series, How to See the Gospel in Every Book of the Bible.